Hello, good morning to all, and thank you for coming in this third session of the event that we have organized under the umbrella, as Nacho mentioned, of the project PhD Hub. Today, our topic is the internationalization of PhD training. Everyone knows that with the emergence of the knowledge economy and the knowledge communities, research and the top professional services have become more and more internationalized. Accordingly, many students, as yourself, as most of you that are currently preparing a PhD dissertation, are seeking opportunities to study abroad or at the doctoral level. International experience is seen as something particularly valuable for both researchers and professionals. And several studies done by different networks by the European Commission suggest and highly recommend that doctoral candidates should be able to take part in international research activities. But it's not only that is not only the one element that we should keep in mind when talking about internationalization, because the host countries that attract those international students consider that it's appealing to them to have these flows, not only because the fees in the universities where they prepare the PhD dissertations or the different economic activities that they do when living in a country abroad, but because the possibility of creating social and business networks between the home countries of those doctoral students and the host countries, business networks that can originate in further cooperation. Most important of all, we know that doctoral researchers are highly qualified professionals that can develop international careers that can be, in a way, boosted by these international experiences. But what does internationalization mean when talking about PhD training? Which are the international programs that support researchers at all stages of their careers, regardless of their age and nationality, and who are eligible to get funding? Which kind of cooperation between industry and academia and innovative training to enhance employability and career development do we have in mind in a highly internationalized context? With me to discuss the internationalization of PhD training are Dr. Alexander Haskell, who is the head of the European University Association Council for Doctoral Education. As such, in that capacity, he is responsible for the largest European network in that field, covering more than 36 countries and bringing together a community of academic leaders and universities that it's over 250 universities awarding doctoral degrees and institutions working on other issues concerning doctoral training. Secondly, we have with us Jesus Rojo, who is the head of the unit of the technology transfer and European programs at the Fundación para el Conocimiento Madrid +D. And since 2013, he is the national contact point for the Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions of Horizon 2020. In that capacity, he has become an essential advisor to universities, research centers, companies, and individual researchers about the program, as well as he has been instrumental organizing information days, workshops, and other proposals. Equally important, since 2015, he has been the coordinator of the Enterprise European Network in the same foundation here in Madrid, which is a European project that supports the internationalization of SMEs and institutions in Madrid in the field of research and development. And finally, we have Donato Lorubio, who is the Deputy Director of the International Office of the University of Lorraine. And he is in charge there of the internationalization of the university through development of mobility, double degrees, and other initiatives, including the proposals within the Erasmus Plus program, where he participates actually very actively in subject connected to the topic of today, which is the establishing of guidelines and setting good practices in doctoral mobility under the Erasmus Plus program. So our intention today is to approach this concept of internationalization from three different angles, the more general one, and two very important elements, which is the support of European programs to that idea of internationalization. Let's begin then with Alexander Haskell. Let me pose just a simple question that I mentioned before. What does internationalization mean when talking about PhD training? And what lies ahead? Thank you very much. The floor is yours, Alexander.
Thank you so much, Nacho. I'm really happy to be here. I also heard you already had some days, 2 days of conference, and I'm actually very sorry I couldn't participate in all of this, but I'm very looking forward that at least today we can discuss this issue of internationalization of doctoral education. I now will share actually a small presentation I prepared for this. So let me, yes, that's the technical issues you always have. Yes, on the issue of internationalization of doctoral education. And Nacho already introduced me about where I'm coming from. I'm coming from the European University Association, this European network, looking into trends and activities in Europe. And we do a lot of activities, conferences, working group, blog, etc. And teams we have been working on include issues like research integrity, open science, interinstitutional collaboration, career development, doctoral candidates' well-being, and the internationalization of doctoral education. And I think we could say that all of these topics actually somehow are also related to the internationalization, being research integrity, careers, and so on. So, but today I will try to be really more general about this issue. And even though the question is about the future of doctoral education, as a good historian, which is my disciplinary background, I'm happy to go to the past. But just maybe one overview. So EUACD has membership from all of Europe, being it's part of the European Union, but also other parts of Europe like Switzerland, Turkey, and so on. And this already shows that the doctorate and the doctoral exchange between institutions, it's not something that it's going on in every country completely alone. But the role, what we also do today, that institutions come together and talk together, is quite important to develop all the policies I'm going to present now. But now let's go into the past. And when we think about the doctorate in Europe, on one hand, the doctorate is very old. It's actually the oldest degree we have since actually 800 years, when universities started in cities like Bologna and Paris in Europe. But at the same time, the idea of more structured doctoral education is relatively new. 2005, we had about 25% of institutions with structured doctoral education. Now we have about 95%. And this has to do that European universities came together, especially in a seminar 2005 in Salzburg, and discussing some principles of doctoral education, which we feel is a commonality in Europe and somehow determines the European way of doctoral education. This document, by the way, has then updated in the subsequent years, 2010 and 2015. And now there is no time to go into all of this, but there were 10 points which were taken into account, starting with issues like the role that research is in the center of the doctorate. Doctoral candidates are not students. It needs to be into institutional strategy and policies. The importance of diversity, early stage researchers' doctorate, the importance of supervision and assessment. So how important is also to some degree train people to be good supervisor, and that the institution has a responsibility. And one of the other points is the point number 9. So the increasing of mobility, which actually meant, especially when I looked what was in this point, doctoral programs should seek to offer geographical as well as interdisciplinary and intersectoral mobility and international collaboration within an integrated framework of cooperation between universities and other partners. So the collaboration has been seen as a key aspect of the new way we developed doctoral education in the last 15 years. Now, 2016, actually, this document has been updated, and here we had 4 points, which is also research integrity, the digital challenge, and then the third point was the globalization of research. So from the 4 points, 2016, when there was a new conference and a new process between European universities, and this document can be shared afterwards, the globalization has been seen as one of the 4 key areas we have to deal in doctoral education in Europe, posing new challenges. So what are the new challenges which we're in? First of all, the idea is that research is becoming increasingly global. Global problems require global solutions, which is not possible without international cooperation. New technologies at the same time enabled new forms of international exchange. I guess even what we are doing today on Zoom, even if we would be much more happy to meet in person, it's also a way how exchange can be somehow facilitated by technological approach. Then, of course, that the research itself becomes enriched by international mobility. So now the international experience has become an integral part of the doctoral trajectory. And at the same time, if we have doctoral candidates coming to our institution, the institution has a responsibility towards these doctoral candidates. I heard you also talked about issues like mental health and so on. This is all part of this. We can talk together. And then also that the universities, by also introducing international office, put internationalization as part of the strategy, and the doctoral candidates as being the most mobile and flexibility play here a key role. And the other point is the importance of international capacity building. Now, when we look into Europe, the number, what we can see is that there is a very high inequality, actually, when we look about the percentage of international candidates some countries have. Of course, a very small country like, for instance, Luxembourg has an extremely high percentage of international candidates, about 80%, but also countries like Switzerland or the UK are quite high in this and have sometimes even the majority of doctoral candidates to a certain degree having an international background of doctoral candidates. This is the Eurostat statistic. Other countries may have only 1% or 2% of international doctoral candidates, which shows there is a lot to do in Europe to address this question, why this is the case. Now here, just to repeat, on one hand, we speak about the internationalization at home, the question of recruitment of international doctoral candidates, organizing events in your institution, MOOCs, and so on. And the other question is more support people going abroad, having joint programs which also enable the mobility of others. Now, how do we increase actually the capacities of internationalization in a universities? What is the best way to do this? Now, EUA organized 2015 a project called FRINDOC, where we actually looked what are the principles to develop the best way of internationalization for an institution. And here we actually found 4 elements which are key to make internationalization work at the best. On one hand, the need of research capacity. You need a research environment in the institution. You need to have the ability to have good research. You need international profile. You need to look how international the institution is. You need a framework which supports all of this. You need to have the capacity to deal with it. and then you need some form of physical engagement across the borders. In this project, they also developed this into looking into different aspects about, so for the mobility, you have doctoral candidates mobility, staff mobility, but you also need the funding for mobility. You have for research staff capacities, research productivities, funding, and also the right stipends. So the funding is also key, that you can finance a good research infrastructure, but you need also staff for it. For instance, professors who have a doctorate themselves. You need an international reputation, you need to be visible internationally, and then also very important, you need the right legal and administrative framework, capacities, and quality assurance system. Now in EUACD 2021, we are working on we call it Thematic Peer Group, a new working group, which looks into co-tutelle de thèse, because what we have seen in our conferences, so this kind of joint doctorate is actually what keeps people emotional. Sometimes it's very difficult to organize this kind of co-tutelle, and sometimes it takes a lot of time, but it's also very attractive and very interesting to collaborate between institutions. So it's interesting to discuss how this collaboration can be done best, what are the best legal framework and institutional framework. So now let's go to the elephant in the room. And I know we are all tired, and we hope all that COVID-19 will be over as soon as possible. But I think, and also it leads us to interesting question about what is actually important also for the future of internationalization and doctoral education. And this is like the last point I would like to look. First of all, what we have seen with COVID-19, the role of the funding and the importance of ensuring the right funding of doctoral candidates. This has become, for instance, a problem where people had deadlines or only funding for a couple of months, and then, for instance, have to do their research take much more longer for the restriction we have, which also lead to the question of time, how do you involve actually international experiences in what you are doing, and also to what degree can we and also need we to have more flexibility when it comes to the doctorate. We saw there is now this global crisis, but the other question, how do we guarantee a way to address in the right way how we organize the doctorate? Then the old question of mobilities, the virtual mobility, to what degree we can also use things like Zoom or so for having a mobile experience, while at the same time we know the personal exchange is becoming more and more important. Then when we speak about this kind of Zoomification of doctoral education maybe, or of higher education, to what degree can we in the future replace the interaction with the professor through Zoom? And the other point maybe leading to that, to what degree we are getting more global by these new technical means. So, and this is something which came up in our discussion, that at the end you will have you will say, I'm living in Spain, but I want to have a professor in the US and in Italy, and I will be more in this kind of global doctorate. Now, by saying this, I would thank you very much for your attention. You can find here our website with all the reports I also mentioned, and please contact me if there is any question and remark. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexander, for the presentation, which it seems that we are developing new skills. It has been a wonderful presentation in this COVID-19 situation. And many have seen that at the core of the internationalization in the presentation of Alexander has been the identification of a list of needs, including, and most importantly, the funding, to choose the correct funding, both individually at the institutional level. So it's time to move to these questions and what we expect in the future. It's been attracted by the concept of global doctorate and the co-tutelle approach of Alexander. But now Jesus Rojo we'll talk about what could we expect of the future funding system for these sort of initiatives for doctoral studies within the program of Marie Skłodowska-Curie Action in the future Horizon Europe. So, Jesus, it's time for you to talk about that.
Okay, hello everybody, and thank you for the invitation. I'm going to share my presentation with you. Related with the previous presentation, there is one main program that is fitting with the innovative doctorate requisites, and this is the Marie Skłodowska-Curie Action Program, the ITN, during Horizon 2020. And I'm going to present you the new features and some ideas about the future of the Marie Skłodowska-Curie Action in Horizon Europe during 2021 and 2027. This is the official presentation we have. Is from the Commission, and due to the COVID-19 situation, everything is delayed, and probably the new program will have a small delay and will start probably in the first quarter of the 2021. Horizon Europe is the new future program to foster research and innovation and European, but also global level. It has 3 pillars, like you can see in the presentation: strength the EU scientific and technological basis and the European research area, boost Europe's innovation capacity, competitiveness and jobs, and also deliver on citizens' priorities and be involved citizens in the research cycle. The Commission proposed a budget of 100 billion euros, but it now is under negotiation, so we don't know exactly the amount after the COVID situation. So Horizon Europe has this preliminary structure. As Horizon 2020, we are under the pillar 1, excellent science, with the ERC and the research infrastructure. So it doesn't change for the future. The Marie Skłodowska-Curie Action, the overall is the continuation. As you may know, we are a bottom-up approach program without topics, and it's a competition-based research program. It's based on the quality and the excellence of the institution, the researchers who are applying. We are working on 5 main areas. It's the mobility of researchers, the training of researchers, strengthening the human capital across the European research area, but not only, because we are a very international program. We are working on facilitating synergies and promoting the public outreach. It's so important to put together citizens and researchers in order to collaborate, but also in order to promote the figure of the researcher and the importance of the researchers to society. The Commission proposed a budget for the future Marie Skłodowska-Curie Action is 6.8 billion, but then now we knew the last week that we will get a reduction of the budget. It's a pity, but now we are under negotiation with the Parliament, and this is probably the budget will be around 5.4 billion for the program. The evolution of the program is related with simpler rules, definition, harmonization, related with management. So for those who are interested to apply for the future call, everything will be almost the same with a small modification, but the idea and the core of the program will continue the same. The Marie Skłodowska-Curie Action, maybe you know, we are based on 5 programs. Is the Marie Skłodowska-Curie Action Doctorates, is the previous ITN, the European Training Networks, the Industrial Doctorates, and the European Joint Doctorates. We have another for postdoc researchers. We will have a staff exchange program during Horizon 2020. It was called RISE, Research and Innovation Staff Exchange. And in this program, we offer also opportunity for mobility and collaboration for predoctoral researchers. We will have, for sure, the COFAN, and the Maria Scotta Curie Action and Citizens is, as you can see, is related with public outreach event, the European Researchers Night, festival, activities to put together citizens and researchers. If we talk about doctorates, we will have some modification. You can see the Maria Scotta Curie Action will continue to support doctoral candidates and programs. The novelty is that it will be only one single action that will integrate the three sub-actions we had during Horizon 2020. So the European Training Networks, the European Industrial Doctorates, and the European Joint Doctorates will be together in the same action. And as you can see, there will be incentives for industrial and joint doctorates, and also a pre-agreement in joint doctorates. So it's very interesting, the previous talk about the co-tutel, because joint doctorates is based on the collaboration among 2 or 3 universities in a doctoral program at the European level. Another novelty is that probably we will reduce the fellow months project. So it means probably the size of the project will reduce about 10 fellows per project in order to help with the success rate of the program. And also the Commission will introduce some kind of restriction for the resubmission and about the quality and the threshold. So because in the last year, we get so many applicants and the success rate is so low, and we need to encourage applicants and institutions to submit proposal. And probably this will be the novelties during Horizon Europe. For postdoc, it will be changes related with the research experience, the requisite for a PhD degree before the deadline of the call, and also some restriction related with the resubmission of proposal. Related with the staff exchange, it will continue the same. It's a good chance to collaborate with the non-academic sector, with SMEs, with industry, and also it's a good opportunity to involve predoctoral researchers in international collaboration, mobility, etc. So this is a very interesting program. It's the previous RISE program, and now the new name is supposed to be staff exchanges. Finally, the COFAN. This is a program for institutions, governments, organizations, in order to co-fund national and regional institutional scheme for higher doctoral training or postdoctoral fellowship. So this is another opportunity for institutions in order to set up a doctoral program at regional, national, and international level. And finally, it's so important to put together citizens and researchers, predoctoral, postdoctoral, and institution. So it's going to be a new European Researchers Night activities. The Commission is preparing also new activities like festivals, science festivals, and other events in order to communicate and put together citizens and researchers. So here is the end of my presentation. So you can contact your national contact points in your country. In Spain, we are 2 people working as national contact point, my colleague Cristina and myself, and we are here to provide service and advice to any institution and researchers who are interested in the program. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jesus. We understand that this is being a very hectic time for everyone connected to the development of the new European programs. Much has to be said in the coming weeks and months.
Yes.
So we are eager and looking forward to see how all the pieces of the puzzle are going to be put in hopefully in the correct place, including the amount of funding. It's a bad news that they have reduced, but hopefully in the discussions in the parliament, this can be modified a little bit. As Jesus has mentioned, he has talked about all the possibilities that this program, the Marie Skłodowska-Curie program, could give researchers to choose to find the correct funding, to use the words of Alexander. But it's not only that this program that can be helpful from in approaching the topic of today, this question of internationalization of PhD training. The European Union, the European Commission, has another program very well known when talking about mobility, which is the Erasmus Plus program. Now, similarly with Horizon Europe, now there are being discussions about the future program. But Erasmus Plus enables not only the mobility, the individual mobility, as the Marie Skłodowska-Curie enables researchers to have individual funding. It's also thought for institutions to develop, together with other institutions, schemes for this increasing capacity of internationalization of doctoral candidates. To discuss about topics that Alexander has mentioned, like the virtual mobility, like the recognition of that element of study abroad during the doctoral preparation of the dissertation. With us, as I mentioned at the beginning of this session, is Donato Lorubio, who perhaps is at the forehead of these discussions as co-coordinator of one project financed by the Erasmus Plus program, which is DocMob. And as I said, their aim is to contribute to a smooth the procedures, the bureaucratic and all the questions connected to the mobility of doctoral candidates when they move abroad. So Donato also will talk about what we expect about the future Erasmus Plus program. And then I'm sure that everyone here will see that an holistic approach to these policies of internationalization will give us a clear idea of what is the way ahead. Donato, thank you very much for being with us. Now it's time for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ignacio. So, as Alexander said, there is actually doctoral mobility, as we say in its presentation. But as I work in an international office, I noticed that there was no Erasmus mobility at third level. So when we talked about our colleagues, we noticed that there was a common situation in Europe. In this case, we tried to understand why PhD students didn't use Erasmus Plus funding for mobility, because there was mobility, but not with Erasmus Plus. So we decided to build a consortium of university composed with the University of Lorraine in France, but also other university through Europe, the EUF, and we applied for a strategic partnership funding. So, what Erasmus Plus say about doctoral mobility? Doctoral mobility should be treated just like student mobility, so just like first and second cycle, and mobility should last between 3 and 12 months. Students must sign a learning agreement that require the validation of 30 ECTS per semester. Scholarships are equal for both master students and doctoral students. And at the end of mobility, students will be awarded a transcript of records. So we noticed that there was, at least at PhD level, difficulties to attain some of these objectives. So the validation, for example, 30 ECTS per semester is really difficult for third cycle students because in Europe the situation is different from country to countries. There are some countries, some institutions that do not use ECTS for third cycle. The duration of mobility, doctoral mobility, is usually short-term mobility. So people tend to go back and forth between a place. So Erasmus funding is not really well adapted for this kind of mobility. And the minimum duration of mobility is another obstacle because the co-tutel often require more than 12 months of mobility. The transcript of record is difficult for research-based mobility. As I said, it is difficult to assess where the mobility is mainly research-based, to assess the mobility to get transcript of records. Some countries like France cannot use the traineeship mobility for PhD students. When PhD students go abroad, often it is to go traineeship, for example, in enterprises or traineeship in research labs. And the funding. PhD students have often family and financial situations that are different from bachelor and master studies. So we asked ourselves if Erasmus funding are enough for PhD students. So what are the objectives of our project? Is to share good practices for doctoral mobility, to addressing policy recommendation for next Erasmus program, and to build some specific tools like a specific doctoral learning agreement and transcript of records. The methodology. We start the project in September 2018. Started with surveys spread all over Europe to understand if what we think the obstacle of Erasmus Plus mobility for PhD students was true, and to see if there are other obstacles to that mobility, to draft the tools, and then in the phase 2 and 3 to test these tools, so to test the learning agreement and transcript of records, and to see if it is well adapted for PhD mobility. The project will end in December this year, so we will be able soon to finalize all these documents. What we find with the results, that the main difficulties are the financial issues for home institution, mainly because institution tends to give the funding, to prioritize the funding for mobility to first 2 levels. So there are not funding left for PhD mobility. The financial issues, as I said, for PhD students is another big issue because often students in a PhD have to fund their own PhD and work and to leave their work to go in mobility. So we cannot compare the situation of a master on bachelor students with a PhD mobility. There is family situation. There are bureaucratic obstacles. There are the ones I just explained, and the family-related issues, because PhD students are often older, so they have different personal situation that tends to create obstacles to the mobility. With DocMob, we tend to give an answer to the bureaucratic obstacles and to address recommendations for financial issues. We say that even if some national agencies recommend to use just the mobility for studies for PhD mobility, in fact, the different institutions tend to use the all kinds of mobility for studies, for traineeship for longer stays, and for staff and teaching mobility for short mobility. So they tend to adapt Erasmus Plus to the need of the mobility. 73% use Erasmus Plus funding, but 59% think that Erasmus Plus are not sufficient for doctoral mobility. And only 65% use ECTS for doctorates. So what we recommend? We said that the grants seems to be enough for short stays. So when we ask in the second stage of the project to our colleagues, and we make interviews to international offices, we make interview to PhD students, we create some working groups with PhD students, and all say that the funding for staff mobility and teaching mobility are enough, but not for longer stays. What all people agrees that doctoral mobility has to be as flexible as possible, as Alexander says in his presentation. One of the goals of our project at the beginning was to create bilateral agreements adapted to the PhD mobility, but we soon realized that the best recommendation is to not use at all the bilateral agreement, because doctoral mobility is somewhat occasional. So the students decide to go in mobility, or is linked to a specific co-tutor. So when it is more systemic, the Marie Curie program is well adapted. But when there is punctual mobility, we try to explain that Erasmus Plus should be more flexible. I will end this mobility. So those are the recommendations we made. And what is next Erasmus program? There will be a new short doctoral mobility, specific doctoral mobility. This is a good thing. I think that European Commission followed some of our recommendations, and this is good. What may concern the doctoral mobility is the new hybrid mobility. So there will be a short physical mobility combined with virtual activities, even if this tends to be, in my advice, a little bit more complicated, because you need at least 3 ECTS of mobility, but it is not a problem, because now the contents of 3 ECTS is not as large as the 30 ECTS of the former program. Even if at the end of Erasmus Plus program, the 30 ECTS was removed for the doctoral mobility. And there is still need of a bilateral agreement. We drafted documents, the learning agreement and the transcript of the record. So we realized that there is a need to have a single document to be completed before, during, and after the mobility, because often students don't just know exactly what are the activity they will attend once they are in the partner university. So there is a part to be completed before. There is a provisional during the mobility according to the thesis co-supervisor, and after the mobility with the transcription or records that include some PhD transferable skills. It will be a mixed template with educational, because PhD students go to attend courses, seminars abroad. Research, because for us it is important to include the research activities. There is the core of the PhD studies into the learning agreement. Training and teaching elements as well, because PhD students need to have the possibilities to include all their activities abroad into this learning agreement and transcript of records. So if you want to know more of the project and to download the documents, please, you can go to the website of DocMob. And if you have any question, don't hesitate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Donato, for such a clear presentation about what I believe is a unique project that you are involved in DocMob, precisely because Erasmus Plus has never been thought as a means for supporting mobility of PhD candidates. This dichotomy between in doctoral studies, between research and learning outcomes, the research becoming more from, well, research projects and learning from Erasmus Plus, is something that sometimes is like a mental obstacle for people like me that are involved in policies of internationalization of our institutions. So it's a first to have news from, well, these possibilities, even when it's something difficult. Now is the time for those in the audience that want to put some questions to the speakers. We have been talked so far about internationalization as something else than the individual experience of a doctoral candidate going abroad. Most of you that, as I said, are preparing a PhD dissertation, perhaps had already that opportunity in their careers. We are talking about something more systemic. What lies ahead, both individually for the researchers and at the institutional level for the universities. So anyone who wants to ask any question to the speakers about the different programs they have talked about, the different initiatives they are involved, and any other question connected to the topic, it's time for that. Well, I do have many questions, so perhaps I'm going to start with one that it's populating my thoughts during the last months, and everyone has mentioned it. Alexander, from the point of view of increasing the mobility of doctoral candidates. Jesus, when talking about mobility programs for doctoral candidates, and also Donato, when talking about the lack of awareness or the difficulties of using Erasmus Plus to use those grants for studying abroad, which is, and the new technologies that the elephant in the room, connected to the elephant in the room that Alexander mentioned before. which is the virtual exchanges, the virtual mobility exchanges, the adaptation to the doctoral studies of these new means. Well, they're not new, but new means to. Then my question is to everyone, all the three speakers, about how to make that possible, if it's possible. Which is the added value for a PhD student, not in a systemic mobility like a joint or a co-tutel, but these sort of virtual mobilities, if eventually are funded by the Erasmus Plus program, short mobility periods, as Donato has mentioned, or they are embedded in research projects at the European level. What do you think that is the added value of that virtual mobilities? How do you think that would be enhance the internationalization of the PhD studies, the doctoral studies? Alexander, what do you think?
Yes. Well, thank you first for this question. I mean, it's not that we think about that just because of COVID-19. It's especially the question also of the ecological question about what it means, this very high mobility, flights, greening, the different programs, which the discussion already come up. So, and even if there is no more COVID-19, which we really all hope, we still need to deal with this question, what it means and what is a sustainable mobility. Now, at the moment, we are somehow forced to make a lot of experiences, which we would have taken much more time to make them, about the more virtual element. And I would say we are really at the beginning. So I don't think anybody has found yet the right way to include the virtual into the physical, especially also in a way that you may also replace the physical by the virtual. So what we are doing now, we are really in a testing. It's indeed important, and that's what we all learned, that the value of the physical encounters cannot be completely replaced by the virtual. This may be also one lesson many may have had this time. At the same time, there are things you can do virtual which work very well. So what I would say, which probably doesn't answer your question, but maybe the honest one, at least from my point of view, we still really don't know how to organize this best, and also how to enable a certain equality, that it's not depending on how much budget you have, the more physical mobility you have, but really finding a way for everybody, which keeps everybody satisfied and keep thinking working well. So everybody who is now in this kind of virtual doctoral education is somehow also contributing to this discussion.
In my opinion, Alexander is absolutely right when he said that we still don't know what could be the added value. For just an administrative point of view, I think that virtual mobility can just allow PhD students that could not attend some kind of physical mobility to have some kind of experience abroad. It's just for people who, I think, who could not have physical mobility. Could be interesting for them to have anyway an experience. As I said in my presentation, there are many PhD students who, with their family or work situation, could not attend physical mobility. I think that if there is a possibility to attend some kind of virtual exchange, well, it could be useful for them. Even if from an academic point of view, as Alexander said, I agree with him. I don't know how in a context of a research program, a virtual mobility could be organized.
As a matter of fact, we have one of the students in the audience that had posed a question very much connected to this issue. Is Diria Tayanti, who explains what is his case as a first-year PhD student at the IHS Erasmus, and doing it from the other side of the planet. And then he wants to know if there is any, related experience, because he's struggling very much with the remote doctoral education, particularly when we are talking about 5 hours time differences between his country in Indonesia and the Netherlands, where the Erasmus University is. And of course, how to cope with the situation. I believe Alexander mentioned, and Donato, and perhaps Jesus also mentioned that about well-being of students in this particular context, now with the COVID-19, but in the future with future examples of virtual education at the doctoral level. So any one of you, do you know if this has been posed in the different discussions that you had both at the European University Association or inside the consortium, or at the European level, talking about Maria Sklodowska-Curie actions?
Hello, Ignacio. Talking about the Maria Sklodowska-Curie actions, the mobility should be physical. It's the key aspect of the project, like mobility, move to from your country to the host institution who will hire you. Virtual mobility was a hot topic during many years. Because of the COVID-19, it was case by case. So the Commission allowed virtual mobility and virtual learning, PhD, postdoc, but it was because of this extraordinary situation, like those researchers who should move to the States or another country in Europe, and because of the restriction of mobility, they are pursuing the PhD and the postdoc projects virtually. But this is only because of the COVID, and virtual mobility is not something that the Maria Sklodowska-Curie action will fund. Physical mobility is the key aspect of the program during the last 25 years.
Well, it has been also Erasmus key element. So we never know what in the future we will see. But what about the personal issues? Do you know any initiative about how to deal with the situation that this student mentioned? Do you know that if there is an initiative about this, how? Alexander, go ahead.
Yes, well, just before I go with that, about the question of mobility, of course, virtual mobility is definitely much better than no mobility. And at the end, what we're also doing today with this conference, which is really interesting and great, is a form of virtual mobility in a very short activity. So there is no doubt. The big question we are really dealing now is about the hybrid question, which was also addressed in the Erasmus. So how best to combine these two elements? This is the question we are now experiencing, and I think a lot of experiences here. And about the mental health issue, I mean, this topic has been in the last 3-4 years really being put on the top of the agenda. It started with some research done in some university, for instance, in the Netherlands, where there were really disturbing results actually about the mental health issues a lot of early career researchers have, and this taboo, which in some regions maybe even stronger than in others, is going slowly down. So now we can have a European conversation on this issue. This is completely pre-COVID-19. Now we had made in the CD last early summer with our members kind of an online session about this, where we discussed with about 100 people exactly about this issue. And also here what we saw is that there is a high understanding of this. We know about this. And universities are increasingly starting to do, starting with using some kind of online fora where you can meet your peers. What we could see that the biggest challenge often is isolation. It's even sometimes a question when you do alone your doctorates in non-social distancing time, and it's even more complicated in social distancing time. Now with the internationalization there's also some research done that international doctoral candidates, it's a risk. The risk to get mental health issue is higher. It has again to do with isolation, with lack of family contact, with lack of social contact, and here we have, it even gets often for doctoral schools to access to these people, especially because they are often isolated and you may not have already the contacts, and even more difficult now. But again, here there is done a lot of outreach activities, providing this kind of online possibilities, also depending on social distancing rules, already starting enable again physical meetings. And often it's not about a purely training, it's really about how to getting to people. And just to say, often it's also a technical issue. So often the question about the camera when you are in a Zoom a meeting, so asking people to put on your camera so you at least see each other and are not completely anonymized and you start to lose people. These are some works which has been done in the last couple of months.
Yes, well, talking about the Netherlands, well, first, most of the questions that Alexander has mentioned have taken the form of working papers of the European University Association, which are accessible from the web. So most of the different topics that Alexander has mentioned, and also talking about the Netherlands, the MVO, one of the agencies for research for PhDs, had done, as Alexander mentioned, a lot of work for the last 12 years on well-being of PhD candidates, and actually they have something on COVID-19 that perhaps could be of some interest to check if the student that posed the question is doing their doctoral dissertation at Erasmus University. We have another question from Álvaro Alfayate, which is connected actually to the different approaches of PhD students using Erasmus Plus grants. Which is if there is, he asked about the specific programs of mentorship for doctoral candidates who want to do several internships in different IT companies during the PhD studies. We know that in Spain, at variance with France, as Donato mentioned in his presentation, it is possible for a PhD student to use the grant of the Erasmus Plus traineeship grant to go abroad. We know that in some situations they can even use the STT, the teaching mobility or the staff mobility. But we know that there are very limited funding and so on and so forth. So the question of Álvaro, do you know if there is any other possibility besides in the current funding programs besides those already mentioned for these situations?
Well,
Alexander, could you mute your
mic?
Oh,
sorry.
Oh, thank you.
Well, Erasmus Plus. One of the point I mentioned in my presentation is that when a PhD students in this career of PhD students need to go in different places, and so the PhD mobility should be flexible. In current Erasmus Plus, this is possible because the mobility is allowed up to 12 months per cycle. So up to 12 months, the PhD students could go abroad whenever they want. and where he wants. He can add mobility. If PhD students use other kind of mobility like for teaching or for training, that we should not forgive that the training is an important part of the PhD studies. He can use freely this kind of mobility. As regard of the lack of fundings, it is true that many institutions don't give the possibility to PhD students to go abroad to use Erasmus Plus funding because there was not enough fundings for bachelor and master students, as I said in my presentation. Now the budget for next Erasmus Plus will be increased of a huge amount of increase of the Erasmus Plus funding. Why? Because the European Commission wants to give the possibility to go abroad to a large part of the students, included the PhD students. That's why also the new doctoral mobility is put in place, because they want to be the mobility the more inclusive as possible. So to give the possibility to not only to the largest part of the bachelor and master students, but also other kind of mobility like PhD, and there are other projects about other kind of mobility like staff to increase all kinds of mobility. So I think that the financial issue, we will see how it will be handled, but we are optimists to be that the next Erasmus Plus will overcome the lack of funding at institutional level, at least. I don't know if it answers the question, but.
Thank you, Donato. Well, possibly our student that asked the question will see that in the future we expect many changes in the different programs, but everything takes place, particularly in the current situation. We are 10 minutes over our time, so I'm going to give the floor for the last question, coming from Nacho Bravo from the convener. So, Nacho.
Thank you. Thank you very much to all the speakers for your. And I have just a very quick question to Alexander related to the co-tutel, because you mentioned in your presentation that for next year, it was one of the pillars of the goals from your organization. And I would like to ask about that. I mean, as a supervisor of PhD and supervisor of some co-tutels in the past, I think that is one wonderful formula to promote internationalization of the PhD candidates and PhD programs among different countries. In particular, if we are talking about out of Europe. So I would like to know your point of view about the current status of the co-tutel in Europe, and as well if you know some type of program for funding this type of co-tutel, in particular out of Europe, because you know that in particular, Asia and South America, they are expecting this type of collaboration and cooperation with European universities. And the main barrier usually is the funding program. So do you know some type of program for that? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So first, thanks for this question. In a year, I will tell you much more, because we have this working group really addressing exactly the question you raised. In general, I could say that when we discuss co-tutel in the Council of Doctoral Education, there are like two extremes. On one hand, colleagues who see a very high bureaucratic burden, there is a lot often of bureaucratic burden, the question of different legal frameworks, and also the funding question. So how do you fund this, in which regards, which makes co-tutel sometimes very difficult to organize. And I heard stories about that it took 3 years until you got to a co-tutela agreement for one single doctoral candidate. On the other hand, there is, especially from the early career researchers, this very high interest also to be able to be in 2 institutions, having joined doctorates. And also for a lot of institutions, this is an excellent way of collaboration. So I say this to say that we are still in a situation where there is a lot of opportunities, a lot of interest, but we are now starting to look what can be best done to ensure actually that this kind of co-tutel works organizationally, but also that the funding comes in. But I cannot tell you now exactly about one specific funding mechanism. I know that the new European University Initiative may have some provisions, especially for co-tutels, but especially for the global areas and the global collaboration, there is still a lot to do.
Thank you very much, Alexander. It's time just to finish this session. I would like to say a final word, because there are many students, doctoral candidates in the audience, and perhaps some of them feel that they are going back from this session empty-handed, asking us, including my colleague Nacho Bravo, about possibilities of funding of some specific questions, and many of the answers have been that perhaps in the future of the next Horizon Europe program, perhaps in the future of the next Erasmus Plus program, don't forget, those that are involved now in your PhD dissertations, that in the future you may perhaps be the drivers for change in your universities if you continue your academic career. And perhaps in the future, are you the ones organizing this for future candidates when we find new means to get funding, to develop better careers, to develop better experiences during the studies, including well-being of the doctoral candidate, and so on and so forth. So thank you very much for all the speakers. It has been an honor and a great opportunity for me, and I hope for everyone in the audience, to listen to you during this hour and a half that we are slightly overdue, but just the recommendation for everyone in the audience to check the webs of DocMob project that Donato has talked about, to check the web of the European University Association, which is plenty of resources of ongoing discussions and past discussions that Alexander has mentioned, some of them, not only about doctoral studies, but many other aspects of higher education in Europe and elsewhere, and as Nacho Bravo mentioned, because we talk a lot about Europe, about European programs, but we are talking also about the world. And also to the news that we expect in the coming project Maria Skłodowska-Curie, and as Jesus mentioned, do contact your national contact points on these programs and ask them the questions, because they are there to solve all the questions. Well, thank you very much to all. Nacho, I don't know if you want to mention something.
No, just to repeat my thanks to all the speakers, and just to announce that the next session will start at 11, and you have the link here in the chat box, and everyone with interest in the next session as well has received the email. Thank you very much to everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.